Every time we do things that we know is hurting our marriage, hurting ourselves, hurting our business, we all have a choice to stop that and pivot. But sometimes we're just so much into that flow that we ignore it. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Mastery. I'm your host, AZ Araujo, and I know it's a different time than we're normally scheduled, but I wanted to come on and really prepare for this conversation. I've had a lot of insights, a lot of lessons being taught to me over the last week, and actually every day. That's part of my job, is to become aware on how I can improve myself, how I can just slightly do something better so that I can in the future realize the greater return. And my life has been much of that, is knowing how the game works. By simply taking the right steps and doing the right things every day, I know it's going to compound on itself. And again, I've mentioned this before, where I now have this sense of fulfillment that I never thought I could accomplish. Now, I've always had my goals and my targets set on like things that I wanted. But one thing I didn't consider is how I'm going to feel achieving those things, right? And that's a different area where I think it's very, very hard to describe, because when you don't know what that feels like, it's hard to really put your finger on it, right? And being in a situation where I know I'm firing on all cylinders, where I feel good. And I was telling some of the guys this morning as we were working out, man, my body feels so good right now. And then, I had a conversation with Carla, and this morning I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm so happy we're in this place together. And then I'm looking at my daughters and I'm like, wow, man, I love our relationship. And then I'm looking at her businesses and the people we have in it. I'm like, yes, thank you. And a lot of that is because I decided to do the right things. And it's inevitable. When you do the right things for a certain period of time, it's inevitable. You're going to get those results. But just like anything, it's also inevitable for you to suffer if you choose not to do those things. And that's the topic of conversation today, the path of prosperity or suffering. And it is all a choice. And it is a consistent choice of the things you decide to do over and over and over again will ultimately get you to a place of prosperity or suffering. And I've been on both aspects and both realms of those worlds. And I got to tell you, both require work. But, yesterday I got reminded of this conversation because I ran into somebody that has been in the industry for many years. And I got to meet their spouse, and they were just saying, they were giving me a lot of praise and compliments. And I felt, thankful and grateful at the same time. And they were saying, hey, I've seen them work so hard. So the results that they have today, I get why, because there's always, signs to everything, right? There are signs. I remember talking to my mom too, and she said, son, I knew you were always going to be something, right? I knew you were always going to succeed. You were so ambitious growing up. I knew you were going to do something big. And I think, we get the signs, but I think it all depends on the result that we start looking for those signs, right? Because I've actually done something with my marriage, with my body, with my relationships, with my mindset, with my skill set, with my businesses, people are quickly going back and trying to find the evidence of all the things that I did right in order to create those results. But just like anything else, what if I wouldn't have been that success? What if, I didn't change my reckless ways? And I guess that's the best way to be able to describe my teenage years. It's just very reckless. And I can only imagine if I didn't get those wake-up calls, where I'd be. And if I were in a place where it wasn't necessarily, as what people would consider success, I wonder how they would go back and say, oh yes, I saw all the signs. And I think we all have both sides of that. But it all depends ultimately what we decide to do most of. And I got to tell you, I was on that path. And, I want to go ahead and bring you into my world. As a teenager, one of the guys that I looked up to was one of my cousins. And he's a first cousin. And we were very, very close, and I'm going way back in 8th grade and going into freshman year. He was about 2 years older than me. So, he was always 2 grades, above me. So when I got to high school, he was a junior, I was a freshman, and he influenced me in a massive way. And it wasn't the way that would necessarily propel me to success. He was the first guy that introduced me to drugs. He was the first guy that introduced me to alcohol. He was that guy, right? And I saw it was just my influence, and it was just the things that I had access to, and it was one of those things where I don't think he was purposely doing it to try to take me off the path, but it did spark an interest in me, right? And of course, beyond that, I took it upon myself and magnified those things, because once you do something for a certain period of time, it's going to get momentum. You just don't stay the same way, okay? So if you pick up a bad habit, you gain momentum, and next thing you know, you're 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds overweight, and you're like, how did I get here? Because nothing stays the same. Everything just magnifies. Just like if you're doing the right things every single day, you're going to ultimately magnify those results. Okay, you're going to magnify exactly where you're at with that. So if it is this path of doing the right things, it's inevitable. Like I said, it's inevitable. So when I was introduced to those things, let's say marijuana or drugs beyond that, and I don't want to get into that, but also alcohol, it was inevitable. If I didn't do something to curb that, to change that, it was inevitable what my outcomes would be. It would be a path towards suffering, a path towards destruction. Now, I think all of us get a wake-up call. All of us have a decision to make every time we step into something we know is not right. Every time we do things that we know is hurting our marriage, hurting ourselves, hurting our business, we all have a choice to stop that and pivot. But sometimes we're just so much into that flow that we ignore it. And that's where that suffering starts to magnify. That's where the results we don't want begin to showcase themselves. And listen, the results we don't want may not showcase themselves for a year, 5 years, 10 years, but we will ultimately pay the price. So I magnified those things. I started finding a different group of friends, and I started partying more. First, it was just on Saturdays, right? Then it became Friday and Saturday. Then became Thirsty Thursdays, Friday and Saturday. Then became 4 or 5 days in a row. Every time building capacity to take on more and more of that lifestyle. But every time it became more and more reckless. So it's only a matter of time before it all implodes. Okay? So I can only imagine if I would have gone down that path. And now as an adult, if I would have ended up in jail or ended up broke or ended up, divorced 2 or 3 times or ended up, not taking care of my kids, then the evidence would be, well, I saw it all along. I saw it all along. He had all these things, so it's inevitable he's there. We see the clues, right? Based on the result. So did my mom really see my ambition? Or did she just forget my recklessness before that? Because my results, you forget about the painful thing. But we all have a wake-up call. And I decided to do something with my wake-up call. Now, like I said, I'm bringing you into my personal life. And I'm not trying to cause any shame. I'm not trying to pass any judgment or make anyone feel a certain way, but my cousin also had many, many opportunities to change his ways. My cousin also had many wake-up calls that he ignored, including losing his family, his wife and his kids, including losing himself to a point of being homeless. losing himself to an addiction. And this kid was bright. This dude was smart. But he refused to pivot. He was constantly in an environment that all it did was welcome that type of behavior. And he refused, regardless of how painful the wake-up calls were. Regardless of what was at stake, he refused. And I get it. I'm not saying his childhood was perfect. And God knows if there was anything I just didn't know that may have occurred to him that I wasn't aware of. But my uncle was no angel. He was very hard. But one thing about my uncle, he changed his ways too. You know, he had a past of alcoholism. But he changed his ways. And he showcased that. And he stayed sober. But my cousin decided it was all a decision. Our past, we cannot continue to blame our past as a reason why we've limited ourselves, period. Because not limiting ourselves takes tremendous work. And the more honest question is, I'm unwilling to do what's required. I'll take the easy path. Giving in to your temptations, to the vices, is a whole lot easier than staying disciplined, than staying on routine, than doing it day in and day out. That's the most honest answer. But he could blame his parents. He could blame the environments we grew up in. Or he could get caught up in his own excuses of what the reality is. And unfortunately, he never broke that. And he's homeless to this day. And what a shame. What a shame to not be able to stop this momentum. And it is a conscious decision to better your situation. And everyone says, well, I've always seen it in him. But I also saw the other side, how smart he was, how driven he was. And he just landed in the wrong hands, making the wrong decisions. But we are all right now on a path that we will ultimately, your family will ultimately come to a conclusion to say, yeah, he's always been this way, or she's always been this way, or they will see the suffering of where you're at and the decline of your lifestyle, the decline of the quality of lifestyle. And if we just do a quick audit, and I don't think that's something we do often enough, because we're all on a path, all of us. Right now, as we sit here or stand here as you are, you're on a path. And I think we have to reflect on it more. Like, what path are you truly on? Are you on that path of more suffering or more prosperity? It's one or the other. And it's based on your routine and your daily habits. And if you start just auditing what you're consuming, you're on a path of destruction. If there is no discipline behind that, I'm telling you right now, you're on a path of destruction. And it's going to rear its ugly head at some point. But where do you think you will be with the routines you're in right now in 5 years? Do you think it's going to improve on itself if you don't do something about it today? If you don't start changing your behaviors today? The way you consume food, the way you manage your business, the way you manage your marriage, is it going to improve? Or are you on the path of suffering? And this is where we have to analyze this. Where's your business going to be a year from now? You're on a path to somewhere. And right now, you're going to get exposed, or you're going to magnify the prosperity of it. You're going to expose more suffering or magnify the prosperity of it all. But if you're not marketing, if you're not following up, if you're not relentless about the process, if you're not on a routine, I already know what path you're on. You just don't know that yet. But I've been in the business around thousands of agents around my career, and I could tell you exactly where all of them will end up, unless they make some significant changes to the way they operate. But that's all it is. It's a routine of doing the right things. But one way or another, you're going to magnify results, meaning of suffering or prosperity. You'll know exactly where you'll be a year from now based on your behaviors. If you don't simply have a routine of waking up and caring for yourself and having a regimented day of what you're going to consume throughout the day. If you can't even be regimented with the simple things, you're not going to be regimented with your business. You're not going to be regimented with your marriage. Everything's up for grabs. There's going to be very little growth. Every success comes with a regimented process of doing the right things. Waking up, taking care of yourself, eating the right things throughout the day. But if you wake up, I don't know what I'm going to eat today. I don't know what I feel like. What is that? Lack of discipline. And you expect to know exactly what to do for your business? You expect what steps to take next if there's no consistency or discipline in any other aspect of your life? I'm passionate about this because I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced it firsthand. And as I'm getting older, I start seeing the ramifications of ignorance, the ramifications of not changing behaviors. I ran into this other gentleman at a department store. I guess we hung out a few times in the past. I remember very little about him. But because he failed to have a routine of doing the right things, his life looks radically different than mine. And it's not because he was less ambitious. It's not because I was smarter. It's definitely not smarter. Like I said, my cousin was a borderline genius. It's never that. It's that when I saw the wake-up calls, I didn't look back. I knew there was too much at stake. And some of us don't get it. Some of you are living through that wake-up call right now, and yet you do nothing about it. You have no escrows in sight. You haven't closed anything for months. The money situation is getting harder and harder. You lost your confidence, and yet you do nothing about it. You hesitate to even put a video out. You hesitate to put a post out. You hesitate to make a phone call. You hesitate on everything. Where do you think you'll be in a year? Things will not magically change. And this is where you have to have that honest conversation with yourself. Audit yourself. What path are you on? The beautiful thing is we can pivot if you're aware. That's why awareness, wisdom is so vital. I think that's the greatest gift. And the ability to make decision based on that experience and wisdom. right? We can make the right decisions. And you can't blame anything else. You can't blame the economy. You can't blame where you were raised. You can't blame, that you're not a people person or not good in front of the camera. Those are all things you have to learn. You're taking the easy way out, like drugs, like alcohol, like food. So the difference of where you need to go is that you do it in spite of not being very good at it, in spite of the results you have right now. So it doesn't matter how you're feeling. Okay, if you're feeling down, tired, if you're too busy, the reality is you can't sit on your laurels. You can't just sit there and wait, because you're magnifying something. So don't be surprised where you'll be in a year or 5 years from now. So get back to doing the right things. You know exactly what to do for your business. You know exactly what to do for your marriage. You know exactly what to do for your relationships. You know exactly what to eat. Don't act oblivious. You know what's good for you. You know what's not. Because I got to tell you, the consequences are dire, and it affects more than just you. So we have a choice today: the path of prosperity or suffering. Guys, I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Mindset Mastery. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Badass Agents Podcast, brought to you by AZ & Associates and Do the Work Coaching and Consulting. You can watch this and other episodes by subscribing to our channel on YouTube or by visiting us directly at badassagents.com. And of course, you can listen to this episode and many others on your preferred podcast provider.